Welcome once again to our chapel, which is bigger than some parish churches. But certainly one thing, perhaps an effect that this chapel should have upon entering, and I did see it, I think no one was exempt. The minute you walk through those doors, right away, your gaze is forced to look up. You look up a little bit, you have to capture the crucifix, the proportions and the size of the space. Now that was done on purpose, and we tried our best to do it. But there's some magic number, the architects in the house might know it, where the height has to be to force you to look up. And if you've been to Europe and to the great cathedrals of the world, they have no problem. They exceed that height by a lot. And so when you go in, the first thing you do is look up. Your eye is attracted to what is higher. We tried our best to do it here. We had to get exemptions and variances from the county because we couldn't go that high. And so the architect tried his best and got as high as we could with all the variances and all the exceptions that were permitted to get as close to that height as possible. We couldn't get to the magic number. The county wouldn't allow us to do it. But we got close to it enough that, yeah, you're going to look up. And we wanted that effect. Because when you enter into a church or any temple for that matter, your mind should be drawn heavenward. We've entered a space that's sacred. And in the long history, well, I guess sort of history, how this space came to be in Belen, there was a debate. There wasn't much land left here. And so what to do with the few empty spaces that were left? Well, one original idea, maybe about 8 years ago, was, well, to make another auditorium, a multi-use that can be used as a chapel and also as an auditorium. Where my vote went against that. If we're going to make a sacred space, it can not have any other function than the sacred. We can't show movies, we can't have gatherings, we can't have plays or anything in here, no. A church or a temple is to be dedicated to nothing else but that. And if we can't do it, then don't do anything. Well, eventually the plans for this church came about, and the idea was, yes, it would be a dedicated space, a dedicated sacred space where nothing else would be held other than the sacred. And so, for that reason, when we come in, and everything in here, and every part, every piece of art, every image was purposely thought with that in mind to elevate our mind heavenward. Today we celebrate already the Feast of the Ascension. Unfortunately, the Ascension is one of those feasts that, because of convenience, gets shuffled to the nearest Sunday, but then loses all its significance. In many places, it's just another Sunday. It kind of goes away without anyone noticing it. Yet the Ascension is one of the major points of Eastertide. 40 days after the resurrection, Christ ascends into heaven. And then 12 days after that, Pentecost. The same thing happened when we were in Advent. Almost 40 days before Christmas, during Advent, and then 12 days after that, the Epiphany. There's a parallel between the resurrection and the ascension and the incarnation and the Epiphany. We don't do these things for no reason. And so kind of when we shuffle it to the nearest Sunday, we lost half the significance. 40 days, remember, 40 is preparation. 40 days of Lent to prepare for the mysteries, the Paschal mysteries. 40 days in the desert to find the promised land. 40 days of Christ resurrected to prepare that early church, those first disciples, for Pentecost, for the coming of the Holy Spirit and the birth of the church as we know it. And that's what we celebrate on Pentecost. And so we celebrate also a birth of a new church here as well amongst us. A church that we had a role in creating as well, in bringing forth. We had a lengthy period, much more than 40 days, to prepare for this. I'm sure if we look at it closely, eventually I'll find 40 there somewhere to get to this point, to this day, to this feast. But that we were looking heavenward when we got here is also the theme of the ascension. The disciples are left looking heavenward to Christ. Christ who has come, Christ who will come again. And where we shall see him coming from on high to us again. We also will be drawn on high when we meet him again in our own resurrection. So the Feast of the Ascension orients us, directs our gaze to where we look. Because throughout this time, this Easter time, there's been a little cryptic message in the Gospels. Christ who reminds the disciples that they see him now and they celebrate now, but for a while they will not see him again. And then they will see him again after another while. When we heard those Gospels and we hear Christ speaking, we right away allude to the Passion and the Resurrection. But he's talking about another encounter, the one after the Ascension. And that is the one that we find ourselves in now. And so just as the disciples were left gazing upward for Christ, looking for Christ, reminding us that the here and the now, or world where we are, is not permanent. And Christ who resurrects and comes into the world again, it doesn't resurrect to come and stay forever, but to call us to him, to our heavenly homeland, where those who have gone before us await us as well. Yes, our gaze is heavenward, because that's where the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit are. We're not condemned or sentenced to stay here forever, looking horizontally or around us in the world we know, but to be called to live in the resurrection, in eternity, in heaven. And so our gaze should be heavenward, especially from the ascension on. Because if we follow Christ into death, we also follow him into the resurrection, and we also follow him a la patria celestial, to that heavenly homeland where he reigns as King of the universe and King of all time. Yeah, our last destination's up that way. It goes up. One feature of this chapel that keeps me looking up, at least when I'm sitting there or when I come in, and again, this was part of the grand plan of the architect, was to have as much natural light in here as possible. And if you look around, you see these little arches here, these windows. Some might have suggested put stained glass in there. No. South Florida has a beautiful natural stained glass. And it's the blue sky and the clouds that change all year long in there. Just when I was sitting there, I was watching it. I was admiring the painting that was already being done in one of these windows. Nice blue sky and a cloud that passed through it. That is the stained glass. That is what keeps me looking up. And when we've got more than 350 days of sun in this city, let's make use of it. And so the architect wanted as much natural light to come in here. Actually, we don't need to turn on the lights during the day here. Even behind the cross, there's another window. And as the season changes and as the sunlight changes, even the hue of light will change in here, reminding us of that light from heaven that envelops us all and calls us to him. I'll explain some more of these features in here and what the meaning is in here, because like I said, everything was done on purpose. Nothing was random. Everything has its sense, su sentido, and there's still more to do. And so let's continue our celebration of the Ascension today in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.